Hey everybody, Uncle Rich here again for Who's Telling the Truth. We're going to try to put the bug up there so that everybody knows that you're watching Who's Telling the Truth. Today's show is number 13. We're going to be exposing the FOXTITUTES. Now I know what you're saying. Rich, where you coming up with this stuff, FOXTITUTES? I never heard of. Well, I like to think that I invented it. But you know, I'm not really sure, but I'll be willing to take credit for it. That's for sure. Now, you know, everything that I do on this show, I get from YouTube. Everything I do is on YouTube. And I want to thank you guys for your support on YouTube. And you guys have really, I tell you, last week we hit 578 views, which was over 100 more than 2 weeks ago. So I tell you, we're on the right track, and I want to thank everybody for their support. I want to thank you for giving me your time, and I'm going to try to do the best I can to make sure that everything I tell you is, of course, the truth. Now, today, in my research for this show, I had an epiphany. And we're going to explain that to you in a few minutes. But you know, there's Fox News has had the war on Christmas. They've had the war on Easter. But there's one thing that they haven't had a war on yet. And we're going to start that war tonight. We're going to fire the first shot from Danbury, Connecticut. It's coming from right here. And we're going to start the war tonight, and it's going to be the war on weather. That's right. You know, Fox has been using the war on Christmas, but after a month and after Christmas is over, that runs out. So they can't promote the hatred. Then they go into Easter, but after about a month, that runs out. So they can't promote their hate on Easter. But they can promote their hate year-round when they have a war on weather. And that's what we're going to show you tonight. And you know, I want to say something to Jon Stewart and to Bill Maher, two guys that I have the utmost respect for. Guys, we've been looking at these different wars. How come we never caught on? So listen, I want to hand you the torch. Take the ball, guys. Run with it. But this is the way to get these boneheads. You know, we'll bitch slap them into the next century. You know, when these guys, when we can't talk to them about science, and we can't talk to them about math, we'll just have to bitch slap them stupid, and that's what we're here for. We're here to question everything that we say. Now, guys, before we really get into the seriousness about the FOXTITUTES on Fox News, I want to show you something. If there's one thing that I want you to think about this show, and more or less is my legacy, the things that I want to tell people is, and Judy, if you can show us the flag now. Guys, we've been going over this, and what I want you to do is, when you look at that flag, I want you to think of one thing. I want you to think of free energy. I want you to scooch the person that's next to you. Remember how we showed you? You know, you give them a little bit of a scooch, and you say, hey, what's that up there? And that's free energy. And guys, if anybody's an entrepreneur out there, and if Judy, if you're flipping back and forth, if they're an entrepreneur out there, and if you make flagpoles, guess what, guys? Maybe you should start making flagpoles with windmills up on the top, so we can have a win-win situation. You know, a lot of times whenever you go to buy anything in America, there's different things, different accessories that you want to have with it, you know? So when somebody sells a flagpole, they say, hey, what kind of windmill do you want on the top? Do you want the American flag windmill? Do you want the Patriot windmill? But now we're killing two birds with one stone. And when you see those flags blowing, and can you imagine seeing them at Yankee Stadium? You know, you're watching a ball game and the flags are blowing and everybody's saying, hey, look at that free energy. And why aren't we harvesting that free energy? So guys, from now on, Whenever you see a flag blowing in the breeze, I want you to think of one thing: free energy. We have to take advantage of it, and it's a win-win situation. All right, now, if anybody knows anybody that makes windmills, what they should do is they should get together with the guys that are making the flagpoles. It's pretty simple, guys. Windmills, wind turbines should be as natural as the flag blowing in the breeze. Why did we miss all this? All right, now it's time to have some fun. Now we're gonna let the bitch slapping begin. All right, today we're gonna talk, the first thing we're gonna do is we wanna talk about Bill O'Reilly and Jon Stewart and their war on Christmas. So Judy, all right, you wanna hit me with the first video?
And finally, tonight, Pinners and Patriots, as you may know, Jon Stewart and I are going back and forth over the war on Christmas.
A couple of nights ago, I responded to the ginned-up outrage many Christmas celebrants feel when they are unable to celebrate Christmas at all times, in all places. Last night, one of Santa's unusually large elves fired back.
Our pal Jon Stewart is following the various Christmas controversies very closely. Now, there is no question that Mr. Stewart is going to hell.
I know. But here's where you and your minions don't understand, O'Reilly. Your hell doesn't scare me. I make my living watching Fox News 8 hours a day. I'm already in hell. Boom! Boom! Your move, O'Reilly!
My move, Stewart? All right, here's my move. How can you watch 8 hours of Fox News every day and still be a pinhead? That is it for us tonight. Please check out the Fox News Factor website, different from BillO'Reilly.com.
He's unbelievable, isn't he? And I mean, this Bill O'Reilly's on every night. He's #1 in the ratings. And guess what the average age of his audience is? 71 years old. They might as well be in a nurse. They probably are in nursing homes. What am I saying? All right, so now we've shown you the war on Christmas. Now we're going to forward to the war on Easter. Watch how they continue this. Judy, hit us.
And finally, tonight, Pinners and Patriots, as you may know, Jon Stewart and I are going back and forth over the war on Christmas.
Judy, okay, we're gonna try to do the one that's Tool Time, #3.
All right, it's time for tonight's Tool Time Award, and it goes to a winner from last week. On his Fox News show, Sean Hannity decided that there is a war on Easter taking place here in America. Take a listen.
Now, Easter is one of the most important holidays for Christians, and as we are in the midst of Holy Week, some groups like the Catholic League are unhappy about how much disrespect is being shown towards the Christian faith. For example, the always controversial Lady Gaga has a new song titled Judas.
I wanna love you, but something's pulling me away from you. Jesus is my virtue, and Judas is the demon I cling to. I cling to just a holy fool,
Now, Hannity actually wasted 6 whole minutes discussing the so-called war on Easter with 2 guests. And most of the debate centered on Lady Gaga's new song, Judas. But they also mentioned an article written by avowed atheist Ricky Gervais talking about religion and the afterlife. So in this war on Easter, I'm just wondering, is Lady Gaga the commander-in-chief? Is Ricky Gervais her top general? You might be asking yourself, Hannity's war on Easter, sounds really oddly familiar. And you're right. That's because Fox News is just pulling up an old script and changing the word Easter, or changing the word Christmas, to Easter.
Back in the book segment tonight, we continue our reporting on which American stores are using Christmas in advertising this Christmas season, and which are not. So far, here's the list. Again, our litmus test is which operations are using the greeting Merry Christmas in their advertising and which are not. Okay, using, you can see, JCPenney's, Macy's, Bloomingdale's, Dillard's, not using, there they are.
Yeah, that clip was of Bill O'Reilly when he said that there was a war on Christmas taking place here in the U.S. And he began talking about that several years ago. So since O'Reilly already cornered the war on Christmas market, that means that Sean Hannity must have decided that the only other Christian holiday he can possibly create a fake controversy around is Easter. Now, Fox News never misses a chance to make Christians think that they're being wrongfully attacked. That's the whole problem with the GOP, the right-wing Fox News Christian crowd. They just love to play the victim card over and over. And Sean Hannity is more than happy to give them a forum. But a screw-up by the Obama White House is giving these people a little bit more ammo, unfortunately. Someone at the White House forgot to send out the Easter statement, like they usually do on other major holidays, so you know that that's going to give Fox News and the GOP a chance to say that Obama isn't a Christian, that in fact he is a secret Muslim, all because the White House forgot to send out an email. But of course, to prove that he's a good Christian, the Obamas did host the White House Easter egg roll today. And the event took place this afternoon on the south lawn of the White House with thousands of little kids who had the chance to hunt for eggs, meet the first family, and take part in other fun events. But I'm sure that Fox News is going to find some way to turn that egg roll into an attack on Easter. Hey, they can make anything seem scary. And that's why Fox News and Sean Hannity, you are tonight's Tool Time winners for helping to create this fake war on Easter.
All right, guys, there you have it. So you saw with your own eyes and you heard with your own ears that there is definitely a war on Christmas and there's a war on Easter. But the thing is, they haven't announced the war on the weather. And that's what they've been staging when they say that global warming is a hoax. And, the stuff that they come up with. They are the party. The other day, and I'll get this out later because it's in my case, but the other day I was listening to Mark Levin, or Mark Levine. Anyway, I listened and I said to myself, holy mackerel, if these guys aren't directly backwards, and what they want to do is they just want to play games. You know, they think global warming is a joke. And when it gets to that point, this is why when I say you have to stop people dead in their tracks, because it's not a joke. And when somebody says something about global warming, what you want to say is look them right in the eye and say, why do you hate your kids? What? I love my kids. You hate your kids. If you can't take global warming seriously enough to sit your fat ass down and find out what's going on, you deserve to be bitch slapped. And that's why I'm here, so we could stop the insanity. Now, the next scene we're going to show you it's how Fox plays games with the names. So we're going to roll this, and they think they're cute. I tell you, I'm just hit. Judy, go ahead, hit us.
No longer talks about global warming. They prefer to talk about climate change. Because then anything that happens, they can say, see, that proves our theory.
They had to change it from global warming to climate change.
Calling it climate change. That's what the liberals changed it to when they realized it wasn't warming.
Look, this is the biggest hoax of our lifetimes.
It's a good thing they changed their name of their movement from global warming to climate change, because they would look even more out of touch than they do today.
Climate scientists are now admitting that the data has been inaccurate, and that's why they're changing the terms now to talk about climate.
And now we're in a cooling phase for the past 10 years. That sort of puts a wrinkle into it.
Haven't you guys changed that it's not global warming anymore, it's climate change?
You know, if it's not warm outside, then you had to change it to climate change.
Right. Remember, it was global warming, and then all of a sudden there were decades of global cooling, including the last 10 years.
And the fact that it snows in the middle of their stupid protest is proof that there is a God.
Global warming suggests something more cataclysmic. Climate change suggests something more gradual, something that takes place over time. Global warming is more frightening. Climate change is less so.
You know, once again, the reason why on these clips we leave the entire clip on there is so that we give credit to the source that I got it from. And that clip came from Media Matters. You know, and I go on to Media Matters every day. They are as anti-Fox as you can get. So do yourself a favor. You can go there and have a lot of fun. Also, some of the other things I go, you know, is Mediaite. So this way you get a flavor, you know, for where I'm getting most of my information. And most of the information you see because I post it, you know, and I'm proud to post it. Why? Because most of the people that I listen to got their act together. They're not a bunch of buffoons. And speaking of buffoons, watch what Fox does when it comes to solar. I mean, they can't say, if we're not burning oil, it's not good. Now watch watch how Brian Kilmeade, in the beginning of the clip, is laughing like a hyena. I tell you, if I could reach him, I'd give him the double reverse backhand bottom. Go ahead, show it. Let's watch this bonehead laugh.
Great news, people. The largest solar plant in the world is in the works right now. The bad news is it will vaporize birds, blind drivers, and flip planes.
It's this complete fantasy to think at some point we're going to harness the power of the sun.
Solar is weak and has not been very effective.
The technology is not ripe. It's not ready.
It's not applicable really on a mass scale.
We tried to compete in a market that we shouldn't be competing in, solar energy.
Half the time, solar panels don't even work. Half the time they do work, they produce expensive electricity. I mean, this is just lose, lose, lose for America. We can't do it here.
Why does the taxpayer have to be the one footing the bill to try and see if solar power works?
If it comes, the market will tell us. The market says these companies are worthless.
They're not responding to demand. They're providing something that doesn't work.
I want an energy policy that works, not this nonsense of supporting wind and solar.
The solar industry is leading the country. It's going right down the toilet.
Why are you guys all knocking this stuff? You know, you're going to
Because it doesn't work.
You're going to run out of this dinosaur stuff after a while.
Guys, did you notice one thing? Did you notice one thing in the whole clip? They never used any facts or figures. Never! Why? Because if they used facts or figures, everybody would say, hey, so global warming is real, isn't it? But you see how they do it? They're so deceptive. And the thing, all they want to do is get the idea so that the boneheads that are sitting there watching Fox News can go, oh, it doesn't work. We know that solar energy, we know that wind doesn't. We just saw it, we heard it. We didn't hear any evidence, we heard it. Boom! We're going to move ahead now. We're going to show how they lie, why they lie, and how it's as plain as the nose on my face. Judy, let's keep pouring it on.
Is just not really going to get going. They started saying solar power won't work in America because it's just not sunny like in Germany. So first we have Gretchen Carlson kind of saying, hey, the industry's future doesn't look too good. Let's listen to that first, Lewis, and then we'll skip forward to really the key point. Take a listen.
Into solar power production. Well, today the industry's future looks dim as investments into green energy are beginning now to dry up.
Oh, she just sounds so sad, a very contrite and sad-sounding Gretchen Carlson. Let's now go to the key point that people are just laughing hysterically at because it is just such nonsense that this expert says the following. Listen to this. Brace yourselves. Not safe for children, this type of nonsense. It's very, very damaging to children who are still forming opinions about science.
Then they start to cut prices again, and then we start to throw more money. That's not a viable business solution.
What was Germany doing correct? Are they just a smaller country that made it more feasible?
They're a smaller country, and they've got lots of sun, right? They've got a lot more sun than we do. And the problem is it's a cloudy day and it's raining. You're not going to have it. I mean, this nation is vast and beautiful in its makeup. In California, it's a great solution. Here on the East Coast, it's just not going to work. So you
my. This is just incredible. I mean, how this is a channel that calls itself a news channel, ladies and gentlemen. Of course, why hasn't anyone thought of that before? Why wouldn't you think that some scientist somewhere would have noticed that the East Coast is less sunny than Central Europe and therefore incapable of producing solar power, just can't do it at all? Well, let's take a look at the map and see actually what the reality is. So this map here that you see is basically a map measuring sunlight and measuring the intensity of sunlight and the annual averages that can be collected. And as you can see, on the bottom right of the image, that's Germany. And you can see from the color coding that the sunlight in Germany is very, very close, slightly more than the sunlight in where, Lewis? In Alaska. In Alaska, exactly right. And if you compare most of the U.S., with the exception of what? With the exception of the northwest tip of the U.S., which has less sun, and it starts to go in those same directions as Germany, we've got a ton of sun here. And compared, just for comparison's sake, if you look at Spain, which is on the Iberian Peninsula in southwestern Europe, we have, in a lot of the country, actually even more sunlight than there. So it must be fun being Fox News and actually producing nonsense programming, right? Imagine sitting around and saying, how about this? We'll just say that solar power won't work here because it's just not sunny enough like it is in Germany. What the hell? They'll eat it right up. And it basically happens.
They will go to any length to just keep corporate profits high, I guess.
Right.
I mean, that's really the only objective I can think of.
Yeah, and I could just feel my IQ points dropping as I watched this. After I watched this, I had to read some poetry to recover the 2 IQ points I lost from watching the story.
Scour over the dictionary for a little while.
Exactly. Yeah. Exactly.
Now, I mean, they got everything wrong. Everything wrong. Why would they do that? Because they have an agenda. They have an agenda from the fossil fuel industry and the 1%. That's what they do. They promote burning carbon. That's what they want to do. The most profitable company in the country is the fossil fuel companies. Now, we're going to continue to show you how they deceive you. And you can use this trick on your friends after you learn how it works. You know, some people say watching Fox News will make you crazy. Let's see what some people say. Judy!
Some people say that'd be a pretty good choice. Bring in the Hispanic vote. Some people say, he's posturing.
Some people say, and excuse me, I'll get to you, Joe, in just a second, but some people say that you may be setting up Sharpton for a run against Hillary in 2006 in the Senate.
Journalistically, it's a very peculiar technique because the idea behind journalism is that you're sourcing who you're referring to. This is just sort of a clever way of inserting political opinion when you know it probably shouldn't be there.
Some people say that this might undermine what the U.S. troops are doing there.
Some people say John Kerry has some similarities to an earlier Massachusetts politician.
And some people say in light of what's happened with the oil for food program.
Some people say supported by Iran.
Some say, I've heard a couple people say.
Some say that it's a sour grapes book. Some people say it's just too violent. There's too much blood.
Some people say.
Some people say.
Well, some people say.
Some people say.
Some say.
Some people say.
Some are saying.
Some people say.
There's some people who say something, if not major, has already happened.
Those are his words.
Some people say it's exploitive. What do you say to that?
I was given a folder, a little binder that had the names of all the Fox News consultants, you know, the people who were paid to come on the air to give their opinions.
To be a Fox News contributor means you're under contract and you're getting paid a set amount.
Now, once again, the reason why we leave the graphics up is so that we can pay dues to who presented it to us. So, guys, a lot of times, and especially if you're watching at YouTube, what you can do is I just stop and I write stuff right down. It's beautiful because to me, it's so, I can't remember this stuff, but once I write it down, it's terrific. All right, now, we're just going to keep forging ahead because I tell you, we got them on the ropes and we're not going to let go. We're going to keep pouring it on. The next thing we're going to do is, we showed you this about 2 or 3 shows ago, and it's called a climate of deception. And when you see how the FOXTITUTES pull this off, all the pieces are going to start to fit. Judy, hit us.
The Earth's climate is changing, and the choices we all make are a lot of the reason why. Those two simple facts are under siege from an illegitimate news network, Fox. The far-right channel has fought against the science of climate change for years. In fact, the more one watches Fox News, the less one really knows about climate science.
Progressives all the time are telling you that the science is settled, climate change is no longer debatable. And if you take a look at it, that's the case.
Of course, scientists are going to continue to debate some details. That's what scientists do. But there is no legitimate debate about the fundamentals of climate change. The Academy has laid that to rest.
But you wouldn't know that if you get your news from Fox. Their science reporting has ranged from gross distortion to outright deception.
Global warming. New Yale study says 57% of teens understand that global warming is caused mostly by humans' activities. Is it really now?
I don't believe climate change is real. I think this is global warming hysteria and alarmism.
So-called global warming, which isn't happening.
Global warming is illusory. We're actually going through a period of global cooling.
Calling carbon dioxide a pollutant? Come on.
Look how much pollution I just put out.
A lot of it would be laughable if it weren't so dangerous.
This is our Fox News global warming alert for you. It is freezing.
Blizzard versus global warming. Who do you believe, Al Gore or your freezing butt?
A pre-winter into winter storm like Europe hasn't seen in years. Forget about all that global warming talk.
It's not global warming, I'll tell you that.
Another storm could be headed this way next week. Global warming, where are you? We want you back.
The effort to claim that a particular snowstorm denies the reality of climate change is, of course, silly. The problem that it creates is it makes it more difficult for people to recognize that there are some weather events that are consistent with the trends and with predictions of climate scientists that we should be paying attention to.
What I think it points to is this really proud ignorance on the part of Fox News. You know, they're really not at all interested in looking at the science and the peer-reviewed studies to see what scientists are actually discovering.
We report, we'll let you decide.
They've helped to create scandal where no scandal really existed.
New developments today involving those hacked emails from Britain suggesting scientists are fudging data to make their case for global warming.
This is a scandal that blew the entire environmental movement to shreds.
Hide the decline. That seems like deliberately changing the data to suit your way.
The lasting effect is that people now have some more doubt about whether or not climate change is urgent, whether or not global warming is here and now as we know it is, or whether it is somehow questionable.
There have been numerous independent reviews, and in every case, no wrongdoing was found, and the fundamental science has been reaffirmed. Fox perpetuated this story. They, I'm sure, covered a handful of hacked emails far more vigorously than they covered conclusions of the National Academy of Sciences or of mainstream scientists when they find new evidence that the climate is changing all around us.
Their slanting of the news comes directly from the top. In late 2009, in the midst of global climate talks, Fox's managing editor Bill Salmon instructed news staff on how to deceptively report the facts.
We uncovered that Bill Salmon had sent an email to the journalists of Fox News and told them that they shouldn't report that the planet had warmed in any period. What he wanted them to do was to cast doubt on the temperature record. And he said that anyone reporting claims that the climate had warmed should immediately note that the data has been called into question.
But skeptics say the record-keeping began about the time a cold period was ending in the mid-1800s, and what looks like an increase may just be part of a longer cycle.
What we wanted to see was how views about EPA's regulation of greenhouse gases were being represented on television news outlets. So we did a search dating back to December 2009.
In 2009-2010, Congress failed to pass comprehensive legislation to limit carbon pollution, but EPA still has authority under the Clean Air Act to reduce global warming pollution.
And we looked at all the guests who spoke about this issue on 9 networks. And what we found was that 76% of these guests were opposed to greenhouse gas regulations. And if you look at just Fox and Fox Business Network, that number jumps above 80%.
we're seeing a very distorted picture of what EPA is trying to do. In fact, they're required under the law, and they have a long history of adopting sensible standards that reduce pollution while protecting our economy. And that's what we expect EPA to continue to try to do if they're allowed to do their job, which is what most Americans want.
Like the rest of their climate coverage, from so-called ClimateGate to their attacks on climate scientists, the point seems to be to confuse the issue. What they're doing is distorting the truth to fit a right-wing agenda. You can hear it in the talking points they use, the same ones used by Republican politicians.
For the first time in the history of keeping records, there's snowfall on the ground in all 50 states.
Mr. Speaker, since the release of these emails, it has become very clear that the science is in fact not settled.
I don't think that anyone disagrees with the fact that we actually are in the middle of a cold period that started about 9 years ago.
But there isn't even one study that can be produced that shows that carbon dioxide is a harmful gas.
Every time we exhale carbon dioxide.
We don't know what those other cycles were caused by in the past. Could be dinosaur flagellants, or who knows.
Everything looked frozen right to the depths of the ground. And it just makes you wonder, where is this global warming that's going to save us?
The facts of what's happening to our world should not be a partisan issue, but many conservatives and Republicans, for one reason or another, have made it one. And Fox, as the communications arm of the Republican Party, has been more than happy to help.
Fox News viewers are the Republican voting base. I mean, Republicans go to one news outlet. There's one that they trust, and it's Fox News, and they don't trust anybody else.
There's a remarkable degree of consistency between what anti-government think tanks, conservative politicians, and Fox News say about global warming.
Groups like Greenpeace have documented for a long time the funding of the sources of the climate deniers, and pretty much every single one of them, over 90% of them, are funded by an organization supported by ExxonMobil.
The Koch brothers in particular, which is oil industry money, have put millions of dollars into efforts both to block legislation and now to block EPA standards on carbon pollution.
And these groups are set up to influence the public debate, and they often work through conservative media outlets like Fox News.
If you accept the basic facts about climate change, government has to do something. Government has to both prepare for climate change that's unavoidable and take steps to avoid climate change that's unmanageable. If you hate government and you are opposed to everything that government tries to do, you can't accept those facts. So their effort is to perpetuate a debate about reality rather than focus on how we should be dealing with the reality of climate change.
It's never been more clear that Fox is not news.
Fox is not news. You know, I always say Fox and the word news don't belong in the same sentence. But you know what? We've been awful rough on Fox News today. I mean, we really have. We beat them up. We pushed them around. I mean, we've hit them with so many lefts. You think by now they'd be begging for a right. So you know what? We're going to slow it down. We're going to wish them a happy birthday. But if you think we're going to be nice, you're wrong. Because Jon Stewart's going to wish them a happy birthday. Judy?
Like to be premier journalists. We'd like to restore objectivity.
We hope you depend on us for the truth, because we're going to report the situation in Iraq without an agenda or any ideological prejudice. Once the war against Saddam begins, we expect every American to support our military, and if they can't do that,
to shut up.
You did your nice little conservative hit job on me. And you got that little smirk on your face, and you think you're so clever. You people ask me questions, you don't ask the other side.
Fox has figured out that by simply putting a question mark at the end of something, you can say anything. For instance, the question mark, a prophylactic protecting Fox News from anything it might contract during its extensive GOP. Wait a minute! Wait a minute! You can't just come out and say that, but...
Shut up. You had your 35 minutes.
I'm just asking!
Why? Listen, cut his mic.
Listen, Chad, stop. Chad, I want to test if you're an honest individual.
I know what I was doing? Shut up.
Please don't tell me to shut up.
As respect.
But thank you very much for being here.
It's a right-wing network, and you don't want to hear this stuff.
I want to know how many people in the Bush administration you asked, why didn't you do anything about the coal? I want to know how many people you asked, why did you fire Dick Clark? I want to know how many people you asked about this.
Did you ever watch Fox News Sunday, sir?
I don't believe you asked them that.
We asked plenty of questions.
You didn't ask that, did you? Tell the truth, Chris. Tell the truth, Chris.
Camuto's not saying these things. He's just asking. Like, is your mother a whore? What? I'm not saying she's a whore. I'm just wondering out loud if she is a whore.
Now that's how you deliver a bitch slap. I mean, Jon Stewart is terrific. But don't forget, I think he's got like 19 or 18 writers or something. So, I mean, these guys must have a lot of fun when they're writing this stuff. All right, now, we're going to forge straight ahead. Now, earlier, you saw in one of the other clips about the Fox memos. And we're going to show you how they control their portion of the media. And you know, a lot of times when I'm watching them in the morning, and I sit there and I watch Fox, so you don't have to, all right? But anyway, when I'm watching it in the morning, I'll sit there and I'll say, who's writing this? Because this isn't coming off an AP teletype, or this is being written. And why? Because you could see the agenda. You see what they want to achieve. And everything that they want to achieve is for the 1%. We've spoken about this time and time again. It's the rich people paying the other rich people to convince the middle class to blame everything on the poor and the immigrants. And that's why we're fighting, and that's why they want to convince you that global warming is not happening. Why? Because once they have to admit it, then we have to fix it. And how are we going to fix it? It's going to have to come out of the shareholders' pockets. And the shareholders don't like taking money out of their pocket. All right, now we're going to go to the Outfox clip with Robert Greenwald. And this is from the movie. And you're going to see how the memos and how they direct everybody and how it's more than a conspiracy. Judy?
With that, I want to move on to the next clip, which is the Fox News memos clip. So these were the famous memos which we discovered with Outfox, and I will never forget the day, kind of like maybe a bad detective movie, when I had heard that there were these memos. Someone had reached out to me, and she agreed to meet me in a hotel lobby, literally in a kind of disguise, with a manila envelope. And the person sat down. We recognized each other with hand signals. I'm not so great at the detective stuff. And they slipped me this manila folder. And, you know, I said, thank you. I tried to engage in conversation. They said, look, I'm terrified. I'm scared. Goodbye. Thank you for doing what you're doing. And we're gone. And then immediately started opening the memos, and literally I thought I was going to hyperventilate right there in the lobby when I saw what they were. So with that, let's show the memo section, please.
I suspect your research has discovered the memoranda that were written by John Moody and by Roger in terms of setting the tone for the day. The message of the day is a very political device.
Let's spend a good deal of time on the battle over judicial nominations, which the president will address this morning. Nominees who both sides admit are qualified are being held up because of their possible, not demonstrated, views on one issue, abortion. This should be a trademark issue for FNC today and in the days to come.
There was nothing covert about the way the managing editors in New York or Washington operated. They made it perfectly clear what they expected from us.
The so-called 9/11 Commission has already been meeting. This is not what did he know and when did he know it stuff. Do not turn this into Watergate.
Every morning there was a detailed list of subjects to talk about, not talk about.
Kerry's speech on the economy at Georgetown is likely to move onto the topic of Iraq. We should take the beginning of the Kerry speech and see if other news at the time is more compelling. It is not required to take it start to finish.
They were just actually issuing edicts to the reporters to control what they could say and how they could say it.
Let's refer to the U.S. Marines we see in the foreground as sharpshooters, not snipers, which carries a negative connotation.
When headquarters sent a memo every morning and said, we want to touch on the following issues, we want to cover the following stories, we want to do them in this particular way, our job and our objective then was to execute the plan.
The pictures from Abu Ghraib prison are disturbing. Today we have a picture, aired on Al Arabiya, of an American hostage being held with a scarf over his eyes, clearly against his will. Who's outraged on his behalf?
Outfox came out 7 years ago, and Brave New Films has been on the case for 7 long years now, and it turns out that it's even worse than we originally imagined in that movie. New memos have come out that show you exactly how biased Fox News is. Here, let me share some examples with you. In November of 2006, after Democrats won the elections, Fox News senior vice president John Moody said, the Iraqi insurgents must be thrilled at the prospect of a Dem-controlled Congress. He told his reporters and anchors to report that, which of course was fantasy. There was no such thing. But nonetheless, Martha McCallum went on the air that night on live news and asked about, quote, reports of cheering in the streets on behalf of the supporters of the insurgency in Iraq, that they're very pleased with the way things are going here, and also with the resignation of Donald Rumsfeld. Totally made up and makes it on with no basis in fact whatsoever. Later, Bill Salmon, Fox News' managing editor in Washington, during the 2008 elections decides to emphasize Obama's, quote, affinity to Marxists.
Now that the words Marxist and socialist are being thrown around out there in the news cycle, I thought it was interesting to go back and revisit what Barack himself said about Marxists and socialists in his book. And it turns out he was drawn to Marxists and socialists as a young man.
And guess what happens? Hey, look at that. It's Martha McCallum again. In October 27th of 2008, co-anchor Martha McCallum on Fox's Live Desk comes out and asks about Obama's connection to socialism and Marxism.
Socialism has been one of the biggest words we've heard tossed around in the past couple of days. Your thoughts on how they're both fighting and waging this war over the best way to solve this economic crisis, Bill?
When you start talking about spread the wealth around, which is what Barack Obama said to Joe the plumber, and now this new radio thing that came up today where he talks about redistributing the wealth, you know, those two things come together are tantamount to socialism.
This is how they do news over there. It isn't news, it's absolutely propaganda. Here's what Moody said about George W. Bush, quote, his political courage and tactical cunning are worth noting in our reporting through the day. And of course, that's exactly how Fox News reported it. In fact, during the Iraq War, and this is really disturbing, here's a direct quote from one of Moody's memos. He says, quote, do not fall into the easy trap of mourning the loss of U.S. lives. They pretend to be patriotic over there, but they are no such thing. They are a total propaganda outfit for the Republican Party, and if the Republican Party costs some U.S. lives in a disastrous war, doesn't matter. We will cheerlead that war. We will call it political cunning and courage, and if there are U.S. lives lost, we will not mourn them. Those are the memos that come down from so-called Fox News. In 2009, more memos come out, and this time again, it's Bill Salmon. Hey, you know what? The public option polls really well. But if you call it a government-run option, it doesn't poll as well. So all of a sudden, here come the memos raining down on their so-called news anchors. Salmon's memo says, please use the term government-run health insurance, and when brevity is a concern, government option whenever possible. And he says, if you're going to refer to it as a public auction, call it the so-called public option. And he says, quote, let's not slip back into calling it the public option. So what happens? Same night, special report, Washington newscast, so-called news anchor Brett Baer says, we are going to, quote, take a look at the fight over government-run health insurance, when the night before he'd been calling it a public option. All of a sudden the language changes because the news actor got a new memo from the so-called heads of news. And Chief Washington correspondent Jim Angle referred to a government insurance plan that night. And just to top it off, he gave the second part of the memo as well. On air, he said, the so-called public option. They do not do news over at Fox News. They do propaganda for the Republican Party. It is very clear from the memos we've gotten inside. It was clear during Outfox. It's become even clearer since then. It is simply another arm of the Republican Party.
And thank you, Cenk, for not only that, but all of the terrific work you and the Young Turks are doing and continuing to do. Again, another example of the importance of independent media. The Young Turks are a key point in being able to create video, to follow the news, to give a point of view about the news, and to connect the dots, which is, after all, one of the most important things that we all do. In a world with so much information and, frankly, so many crises, the ability to connect the dots and create a narrative and create a way that people can understand the world is what the Young Turks and the Nation and the Alternate all have in common.
You know, guys, we always like to leave you with an idea when you're talking to somebody about global warming that is virtually irrefutable. You know, a lot of times what I'll do is I'll cite the parts per million of the carbon dioxide in the air, which we're about to reach the 400 parts per million. We haven't had that level in, I think, over 800,000 years. So, obviously, something is wrong. Now, you know, a lot of times people will say, you know, like, yesterday it snowed in Oklahoma. The first time since they've been keeping records that it snowed in Oklahoma. Now, is that climate change or is that a coincidence? Last year, Superstorm Sandy virtually closed New York City. They had to close all the subways. They were underwater. Was that coincidence? Or was that climate change? And what happens is, after a while, you start to add up all the coincidences. And guess what? They're not coincidences anymore. It's the new norm. And this is the thing that we can't accept. We can't accept a new norm. We can't change things. We can't start growing corn on the tundra up in Alaska. You know what I mean? The forests are dying because the pine beetles are able to migrate further north because the globe's getting warmer. So these are the things when you're talking to somebody. You know, use something specific like parts per million, something they can't argue with because it's written all over the place. And then all you have to do is use a little common sense. But another thing that you might want to say is 97% of the climate scientists from the National Academy of Sciences, not only in America, in all the National Academy of Sciences, there's 19 of them, in every one, they all agree that global warming is happening and it's man-made. Even the one in Russia and the one in China. Can you imagine that? Communist China is doing something for its citizens, for the common good of the people, and we can't do it for the common good of the people. Why? Because the 1% demand that we burn this crap. And they don't care about our kids All they care about is their pocketbook and their party. And this is why I'm here. And I mean, if we haven't shown you enough evidence by now, I mean, this has got to wake you up. But you know what? We're not going to stop here. Well, one more time, we're going to go to the floor of the Senate, and we're going to show you how unrealistic these boneheads are. And you would think, I mean, you would think that most of these guys to get elected, they have to have college degrees. I mean, they got to be pretty smart guys. I mean, how do they get so dumbed down? I mean, and this is what we got to stop. So anyway, this is our last video. Let's show these slime balls, Judy. Hit it.
The Republicans have had some real knuckleheads as the head of the House Committee on Science, Space, and Technology. Now, the last one was actually a guy named Ralph Hall. He was, of course, from Texas, and he had these brilliant things to say. Why does he think that human beings have not contributed to climate change? He said, well, that's because, quote, he doesn't think we can control what God controls. Well, there you have it. That's the guy that was the head of the Science Committee. I don't know, man. Rockets going up into space and NASA. Well, God controls that. We can't control that. I don't know what you're talking about, right? I mean, under that logic, doesn't God control everything? So shouldn't you just pack up the whole committee? Which probably they would love. Ralph Hall also said, hey, that he wasn't worried about global warming. He said, quote, I'm really more fearful of freezing. Okay, but how does that relate to the rest of us? And he said, I'm also afraid of snakes on a plane. And then when they said, hey, wait a minute, you're afraid of freezing, but what difference does that make to the rest of us? He said, well, quote, I don't have any science to prove that. In other words, my concerns about global freezing are unfounded. By the way, I am at the head of the Science Committee. But don't worry, guys, because we have a new head of the Science Committee after the elections. And it's this gentleman. No, this gentleman. His name is Lamar Smith. He's going to be a lot more reasonable. So I'm sure he believes in science. 98% of the scientists believe in climate change and that it is that human beings are contributing to it. Well, so let's find out if that's the case. This is him talking about so-called ClimateGate and the media coverage of it.
Their reporting was largely slanted in favor of global warming alarmists. The networks have shown a steady pattern of bias on climate change. During a 6-month period, 4 out of 5 network news reports failed to acknowledge any dissenting views about global warming, according to a Business and Media Institute study. The network should tell Americans the truth rather than hide the facts.
So he is not concerned about global warming or climate change. He's concerned that the networks are not covering the 2% of bought scientists enough. The ones that represent the oil industry and the gas and coal industries. And, these scientists, they're probably making all this stuff up. The new head of the Science Committee. Now, why does Lamar Smith think that stuff? Well, I might have a couple ideas as to why he would think that. For example, last year he received $10,000 from Coke Industries. Now, remember, these guys are bought off fairly cheaply. It's always shocking how little gets them to change their vote. But that's not as big a deal as what he has received over his career from oil and gas industry, which is $500,000. So this is how the Republican Party works. You pay us bribes, and in return, we put in charge of the Science, Space, and Technology Committee guys who do not believe in science or technology and probably don't even believe in space. Our politics is so corrupt. It's crazy. Speaking of corruption, let me go to the next story.
Tide goes in, tide goes out. Never a miscommunication. You can't explain that.
Oh, that's a good point. I forgot about that. You know what? For a second there, I thought perhaps we could explain it. But it turns out O'Reilly and Lamar Smith nailed it. Tide goes in, tide goes out. Can't explain it. You know who the next head of the Science Committee is going to be? Bill O'Reilly.
Yeah, I don't know if you ever heard O'Reilly do his tide goes in, tide goes out thing, but it's sad. And a lot of the people that watch Fox News are fundamentalists. They're Christian fundamentalists. And They're creationists. And I hate to kick somebody when they're down, but believe me, these people need it. I mean, it's sometimes, some of the stuff that I see, it's just sad. And what they do is they hide behind God, you know? Now here's what really drives me nuts. You'll get these fundamentalists. They'll believe in something that doesn't exist, like God. They'll fervently believe in God. They'll pray to God all they get there, they fervently believe, but yet they can't believe in something that is real, like global warming. You know, you look at a thermometer, you look at the data doesn't lie. Let me ask you one question. You ever go into a Home Depot or a Lowe's and you want to buy a thermometer? Let's say you want to put it on your porch, or you want to put it outside your window. You know, they have all different kinds of thermometers. They got round ones, they got tall ones, they got rectangle. They have ones in a Coke bottle, they have ones with the birds. You ever notice one thing about the thermometers, though? You don't even have to look hard. Take a look at all of them. You know the one thing they all have in common? They all tell the same temperature. When you walk in there, I'll take the robin with the birds on it because that's a nice warm temperature and that's what I want in my house. So I'll take that one. That's not the way it works. The way science works is you use facts, you use data. Getting back to what Mark Levin said earlier, and when I was listening to it on the radio, I said, this guy he needs more than a bitch slap. He said, quote, facts and experience and evidence and statistics and science and reason are the things we conservatives use. What? They don't use anything. They don't use logic. They don't use reason. Guys, we need to bitch slap them. One thing, the double reverse bada bing bitch slap. Boom! We'll see you next week, guys. Any questions? Go on to Who's Telling the Truth on Facebook. Any questions, anything you want me to look up, I'll be more than happy to take care of it. What's our time like, guys? That's it. See you next week.